When implementing an EPC, your PHA installs energy or water conservation measures, called ECMs. These measures reduce utility consumption and create savings for your PHA. To maximize savings, the EPC program offers 3 incentives: the add-on subsidy incentive, the frozen rolling base incentive, and the resident paid utility incentive. These incentives are regulatory measures that also ensure EPC savings are measurable and validated by your PHA. This video focuses on the basics of the Resident Paid Utility or RPU incentive. For detailed information on any of the topics discussed in the video, please see the other videos in this training series, PIH Notice 2024-27, and the HUD Public Housing Energy Department website. So what is the RPU incentive? When your PHA installs energy and water conservation measures for utilities that are paid by residents, the PHA doesn't directly see the financial benefit of reduced utility consumption the way it does when it's paying the bills itself. So for example, if your PHA installs more efficient heating equipment in resident units, and residents are the ones paying for heat, the resident benefits from the lower bills. In this situation, your PHA can't capture those savings through the other EPC incentives, frozen rolling base or add-on subsidy, which only applied to PHA-paid utilities. This is where the RPU incentive steps in to give your PHA a mechanism to capture savings from the reduction of energy consumption for resident-paid utilities. So how does the RPU incentive work? To understand the RPU incentive, let's look at 2 primary factors that determine RPU savings. But an important note before we begin, the RPU incentive uses utility allowances to determine savings, not actual utility consumption or utility costs. As a reminder, utility allowances are HUD's estimates of what a reasonable, energy-conscious resident would use in a given unit. Keep this in mind, as it is key to understanding the RPU incentive. At the most basic level, RPU savings is calculated by comparing utility allowances before ECMs are installed, or pre-EPC, with the projected utility allowances after the ECMs are installed, or post-EPC. For the RPU incentive, these values are called the pre-EPC utility allowance consumption and the post-EPC utility allowance consumption. So how are these pre- and post-EPC values determined? To determine the pre-EPC utility allowance consumption, your site or project's utility allowance prior to installing ECMs is used to establish a utility baseline. This pre-EPC utility allowance consumption needs to reflect the actual pre-EPC conditions, so your PHA must review and update current utility allowances before submitting an EPC application. Now that an accurate pre-EPC utility baseline has been established, let's look at the post-EPC value it will be compared to. In contrast to pre-EPC utility allowance consumption, the post-EPC utility allowance consumption is projected and not based on site or project's actual utility allowance. Remember that when your PHA installs ECMs for resident-paid utilities, your residents will reduce utility consumption. The reduced utility consumption must also be reflected in the site or project's post-EPC utility allowance. To capture the post-EPC utility allowance, utility savings from installing ECMs are projected. This projection occurs during the design phase of your EPC. Your RPU utility savings will be identified on your EPC approval letter and are stipulated for the term of the EPC. This means they are locked in based on the projected utility savings determined and are not recalculated from scratch each year. Note that pre- and post-EPC utility allowance consumption may be subject to adjustments during your EPC's implementation and repayment phase. Please see Notice PIH 2024-27 for more information. The RPU incentive will be calculated annually as part of the EPC Incentive Savings Verification process. During this process, your pre- and post-EPC utility allowance consumption will be compared and calculated with your annual average utility rate to determine your RPU incentive savings. The reporting period for all 3 EPC incentives is July 1st to June 30th. Important note: EPC approval does not change the underlying regulatory requirements around utility allowances. Your PHA must review and establish new utility allowances for units with new equipment the year after your EPC has reached substantial completion. And be aware, the RPU incentive is subject to the 75% rule, meaning your PHAs must use at least 75% of EPC savings to pay for EPC eligible project costs. For more information, see the 75% rule video in this training series and the HUD Public Housing Energy Branch website. Your PHA is encouraged to review Notice PIH 2024-27, which outlines additional considerations your PHA should be aware of when developing and implementing your EPC project. This includes EPC principles and reporting requirements for the RPU incentive. Okay, let's do a quick review of what we covered in this video. The Resident Paid Utility Incentive is one of 3 EPC incentives that aims to maximize EPC savings for PHAs. And it is the only EPC incentive for resident paid utilities. RPU savings is based on pre- and post EPC utility allowance, not actual utility consumption or costs. It is determined by comparing pre-EPC utility allowances with projected post-EPC utility allowances. The RPU incentive is subject to the 75% rule, meaning at least 75% of your EPC savings must be used to pay off EPC project costs. Thank you for your commitment to energy and water conservation. For more information on the Resident Paid Utility Incentive and energy performance contracting, please see the other videos in this training series and the HUD Public Housing Energy Branch website. Questions or comments can be directed to PIH Energy Branch at hud.gov.